Okay, so today we're going to talk about arcade and digital game history, specifically arcade parlors and how it all kind of got started back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And we'll go into digital game history, where finally our electronic games that we know today have come to be. So a little bit about game history. Back in the old days, there were these ancient games coming from Egypt, India, and China, and places back in Europe. And we'll talk about these games in later lectures. I thought we'd start off with more of the fun stuff, if you will. That at least fun being that the games that we know about today, and so forth. So there's non-digital games, board games. It could be role-playing games such as Dungeons and Dragons. Got dice games and card games, and of course we have our Olympics. That we have every 4 years. That started out in Greece, and it's basically trying to show the performance of humans and strength, agility, and speed that humans can do. But for now, we're going to just stick with arcade games and digital games. So let's get into arcade games. So arcade games have been actually around a long time, 30s and 1930s and so forth. But not until around the 1970s through the mid 1980s and 1991, 92-ish, if you will, did it actually become really popular. And of course, if you think about it, around that time, towards the 80s and the 90s, the thing called a console game came out. Starting with the first one was the Magnavox, and the Atari 2600 was actually the first successful console game. But arcade parlors, if you will, are these places that people went to where people like myself growing up went to these parlors that had pinball games and arcade games that we spent our quarters at. But also these arcade games were popular in places like bowling alleys and amusement parks. It was if people were out there to go bowling, their kids would be going to play on pinball machines. And then during this 1978 to 1982 period was the rise of the golden age of arcade games. And in 1981, as for example, it made $8 billion. And that's quite a bit of money, especially back in those days. 1981, I want to say that a Big Mac, fries, and drink was about $1 for those three things. So you can get a Big Mac meal for about $1. So I don't know what it is today, but it's certainly not $1. Rise of inflation, $8 billion today is quite a bit of money. But again, so let's start with arcade games, and the two major games, if you will, that was the most important games were pinball machines, and in Japan, pachinko ball machines. So in fact, this is an image of a parlor in Japan, and you can see this is really still very, very popular. Our pinball machines, I still love playing pinball when I can. You can actually get a game, I forget the name of it, on Steam, online, to be able to play a really good pinball game. I think I probably have it. I might show it at the end of the lecture here, and maybe just I think I'm going to assign it. Anyways, so we've got these parlors that were popular, but pinball and pachinko ball were originally derived from a game called bagatelle, which is basically tabletop billiards, where there's bumpers and things that or pins, wooden pins that you know you throw balls up against, essentially. And that was invented in the 1870s. Okay, but billiards have been around, and pool has been around for a long, long time. Where you know you take a stick and you whack a ball, right? But in this case, pachinko machines came out in the 1920s, with pinballs actually coming out in 1879. But not until the 1930s did these pinball machines become, you know, at least more popular with when it became more electromechanical. Okay, back in those days, you just had a plunger that shot a ball up and let gravity, you know, pull the ball back down, which is still the major mechanic for pachinko ball machines, right? And then in the 70s, this idea of becoming a pinball wizard is is getting the highest score on that machine for that day. Okay, usually if it was, say, for instance, you know, a pinball machine that's in a restaurant or in a gas station, say, you know, you'd go in there and try to make the high score for the day, and it's usually for the day because you know the idea of the pinball machine, you know, being plugged in overnight tends to be not necessarily the case. You know, where the gas station attendant would unplug it, you know, at the end of the day, and then plug it back in at the start of the workday the next morning. So, getting the high score, there was a, you know, a band, the Who. Some of you older folks would know this, that they came out with a song called Pinball Wizard. Is it, yeah, Pinball Wizard is the Who, or was it Elton John? Anyways, um, and the idea of pinball machines was very popular, and they even came up with a song with it. So, but the major mechanic is basically getting the highest score on a pinball machine. So, you know, getting that leaderboard, it was, there wasn't a defined leaderboard per se until you know, later on, but the original pinballs was, you know, trying to get that high score. So here's a pachinko machine right here. This was in 1930s here. I think I pulled it off of Wikipedia. And then here's a modern pachinko machine with the Avengers. So it still hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot from, you know, the early machines, which this one was not electrical. It was strictly mechanical. But as time goes on, obviously, you know, adding bells and whistles of lights and sounds makes it more interesting for players. And something that I want to bring up here is that pachinko machines today actually make more money than Las Vegas. So that's how huge pachinko balls, pachinko parlors in Japan are. So the idea of pachinko balls is, you know, where if you go to Vegas and you play on a slot machine or, you know, casino game like that, you get money back. The payout here is just more balls. So how it works is you pull this lever here and it shoots a steel ball up into the top here, gets bumped around, and depending on which gate it falls into, you'll get more balls that pop out into this hopper here. And if you can get it in a certain order, depending on the type of pachinko machine, you get more balls, depending on, you know, which gate you go into first. And these gates, when it falls into it, it actually opens it wider, so it makes it easier for the balls to fall into this gate here. So, but that's how you play, and then at the end of the, you know, you turn your balls into for prizes and so forth. But anyway, so this is the pachinko machine, and it was, you know, again, mechanical through the 70s and the 80s, and not until a little later did they actually add electrical components to it. And for us, it's pinball machines in the United States. So I wanted to highlight this Adams family pinball machine because this is actually the largest selling pinball machine ever. It had over 20,000 units sold. And Adams family this particular machine came out in 1991, and it was based off of the movie Addams Family. I watched the TV show in the 1960s, where you have basically the shenanigans of this family, who were vampires and ghouls and ghosts, and basically the pinball machine actually depicted this funhouse, if you will, of the shenanigans of the Addams family. So here you've got the actual layout of the machine, and a pinball machine has basically these two flippers that when you send a steel ball up, it rolls around in here and hits things, and the idea is to not make it so that the ball falls down into the through this hole here and also through the sides. Once it does that, then you lose. It's a game over. Usually you have either 3 or 4 balls that you can play, and this is basically a coin operated machine that you put in your quarters. Something that I want to bring up here is that the game mechanics of this pinball machine has not changed even to the games today. I think I have an image. Let me see here. Yeah, let me get this here. And so here's an image of the mechanics of the Addams Family pinball machine here. So it starts off here with the mansion, or the image of the mansion right down here. But what we have are these lanes that, based off of how you hit these particular game objects in here, you can get different types of rewards. So there's skill shots that if you make it through, say, this ramp here, and it goes through and down and hits other types of targets, you can get specific increases in bonus points, right? So I believe there's the GRAVE, which spells out grave here. For the graveyard, if you light up all the different targets by hitting them, then you get some more specific points. There's skill shots here that if you hit, say for instance this electric chair, things happen. If you can make it up this hitting the bookcase and so forth. There's this thing box that it goes through. So all of these different targets that you can aim based off of these flippers here. There's also a thing flipper on the left here that allows you to get more score, more points here. And so again, I'm bringing this up because as time goes on, the game mechanics is really doesn't change a whole lot. It's just how you use them, right? Here you have a swamp eject, or in typical pinball machines, you have a left and right lane that it goes through. So depending on if it goes through one of these lanes, you get more points. I think the outside lanes you get more. But what happens is if there's a chute through here on this far left side and far right side, that if you go through there, then it ends your game, just like the hole in the middle here on Uncle Fester. That is right here. So hopefully you folks have played pinball before. It's a lot of fun, probably not as fun compared to Call of Duty to some of you younger folks, but it's still an enjoyable sort of non-thinking person's game. And when playing these pinball machines, how you bang and move shake the pinball machine actually helps in terms of your shots. So a key component is being able to push the pinball machine at the right times in order to make your shot either not fall into a lane if you want it to, or maybe fall into the lane based off of how well you understand I guess mechanical side of the game. But if you obviously push it or bang the machine too hard, it tilts and you instantly lose your game. So that is the pinball machine. And this is again, you know, the 1991 version of Addams Family. Here, the unit up here, I think it was built in 1933 or 1933. Again, I pulled this off of Wikipedia. Got a site where I got it. And this is strictly mechanical and uses gravity for the ball to fall down. You want it to either fall into these holes. The plunger on the right still does the same today, where the ball gets shot up to the top and then it bounces around, similar to a pachinko ball machine. Okay, so that's arcade and concerning pachinko ball machines and pinball machines. And now let's go to our first arcade video game. Okay, and that would be in 1972, built by Atari, the Pong game. And this would be, I guess, considered one of the earliest tennis sports games or sports game where you've got this paddle that you control and your opponent controls the other paddle, and here's this blipping ball that gets paddled and bounced back and forth, and you're not supposed to let it get past you. Okay, so there is this is really pretty significant in the sense that this Pong game also was first arcade game that was sort of ported over to a console machine, specifically the Atari 2600, and it became the first successful console game. So this is a popular game back in the 70s that started the company Atari. Here we have Space Invaders, and again, so something I want to bring up is that this is sort of my version of the history of arcade and video games. So you know, there are other games that are out there that are just as important, but these are ones that I played, you know, when I was growing up. So in 1978, this was first created and made available as an arcade game. And by 1982, it actually made $3.8 billion in revenue. So this particular game was huge in terms of how much this made, you know, the company, right? Game mechanics, basically you have this ship at the very bottom here that you fire bullets or lasers, and you move it left to right. And then have these rows of aliens that are attacking you. Okay, you know, the idea of having the high score. We talked about, you know, the high scores that disappeared when you unplugged a pinball machine. This actually was you know, became a very popular and important game mechanic of storing the leaderboard and being able to put your initials up at the top, and being that person up at that high leaderboard, and being able to see it the next day, if you will, right? So, you know, I actually put $2.7 billion in revenue down here. This was just another value that somewhere around there, $3 billion that this game generated. Then there's Asteroids. So Asteroids is yet another space game. And you got to remember, back in those days, the space war between Russia and the United States was a big, you know, issue. Okay, and in the 1980s, when the movie Star Wars came out, Ronald Reagan was the president way back then, and he initiated a NASA/military program called Star Wars, where they were going to launch missiles from space to attack Russia. And I actually, one of my first projects that I worked at coming out of college was actually to work on a program called Millstar, which was the precursor to Star Wars. So shooting missiles from outer space at Russia started with this constellation of satellites. There was I can't mention how many of them, but there was more than uh, one satellite up there that that all talk to each other to know where uh, the location of things were going to happen, and a command and control center from Houston and so forth were going to be used to control these satellites to be able to shoot these missiles. Well, um, asteroids was a perfect game, especially when we're talking about you know uh, space warfare in real life. This was a great game to have, to be able to shoot down these asteroids. Okay, that's what uh, why these games end up being popular is because in real life that's what we mimic, right? Um, so here the game mechanic is you have this spaceship that unlike unlike Space Invaders, which you moved your player character left and right. This one actually is you have a thruster, so you can actually fly the ship around in the screen here, moving it around and rotating it so that it shoots and destroys these asteroids. You destroy one asteroid, it actually breaks it open into multiple asteroids till it gets to a certain small size that you can actually finally destroy it and it leaves the screen. Um, so something that's interesting and fun is that you can actually go into hyperspace should you be under attack by too many asteroids. But the issue here is that it randomly reappears on the screen and could be reappearing in a bad spot. But hopefully you're going from a bad situation to a good situation as you go into hyperspace. And here's Pac-Man, came out in 1980 by Namco, and this was a game that generated $3.5 billion in revenue. And this is a single maze type game where you control this pie-shaped character, and in fact, Iwatani, who was the inventor of Pac-Man, actually was eating pizza and came up with the idea of using that pizza as his player character. So it looks like a pizza with a slice cut off because it was from pizza. And the idea here is to eat up all the dots, and when you eat up all the dots, it clears the screen. But before you can eat up all the dots, you have these ghosts chasing you, and the idea of these ghosts chasing you is not a difficult sort of mechanic, but the key sort of mechanic here is the idea that this is the first time you actually came up with power-ups. And when you play your console games today, you don't even think of power-ups as something new, and it's just assumed that power-ups were there. And if you need things like health kits or med kits, giving you more health, or potions and things like that. That all came from this single idea of going to these power pills, is what they originally were called. Calling it a pill nowadays would be not the right thing to call it, but these are power pills. So what you would do is once you eat one of these larger dots here, what happens is these ghosts no longer chase you and in fact turn blue right up at the top right here, and then you can chase them and eat them for higher points. Okay, so the idea of the new mechanic of a power-up came from Pac-Man. Okay, so Daytona, this is an arcade game here that I'm bringing this up now, that you can actually sit in basically a racing simulator, be able to be a Formula racer, or in this case it's a Daytona USA sort of NASCAR racer, where you actually can get the feeling of steering it with a real steering wheel and using gear shifters and pedals to control your game. More importantly is that these games, the Daytona game, is multiplayer, right? So here's a twin unit here, but there's also you can have a half dozen of your buddies, sit in one of these pods and race against each other. And it was just a lot of fun to be able to play these games. And back then it was just a quarter. I think nowadays you have to put in 4 quarters to play. But I'm bringing this up as well as Virtua Fighter, and these games came out in 1993 for Virtua Fighter and 1994 for Daytona USA. Is that around that time there was a company called NVIDIA that was starting up, and some of you might have know what NVIDIA is. They make graphics chips or graphics cards that go into our PCs. And in 1993, it was my job to make this game, Virtua Fighter, work on a PC. So I got a chance to actually work with this game, and it was an exciting time being able to put a title like Virtua Fighter on the IBM PC. There was no such thing as 3D graphics on personal computers at the time, and this was one of the first to have these 3D games because of hardware and technology. So another game that I worked on was a game called Panzer Dragoon. That was on a Sega Saturn originally, and it was my job to make it again work on our graphics chip, the NVIDIA NV1, which was called at the time, and it was one of the first titles that packed in that when you buy the graphics card, you get a free Virtua Fighter and Panzer Dragoon game as a pack-in, as well as using the Sega controllers. Other titles with gross revenue. So in 1991, Street Fighter II came out. I probably should have talked a little bit about Street Fighter II because this was actually the more important fighting game that came out. One might even say that was the grandfather of fighters, and that $2 billion is nothing to sneeze at, right? You have NBA Jam that came out in 1993. Then Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 in 1992 and 1993. So later on we'll talk about the morality of games, and there was a time period where games like Mortal Kombat actually went to the U.S. Congress to, parents and teachers were against violence in games. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But this game was very violent, showing blood and people, decapitating people, players decapitating players. So it was something to be of concern. You think of Grand Theft Auto nowadays, and the themes around that game. But anyways, games like Donkey Kong in 1981, Centipede, Pole Position was my favorite racing game that I played, and it came out in 1982. I lost a lot of quarters in this game, but anyway, so these numbers I put down here, numbers do not account for inflation. So these are how much they generated in revenue at the time. Okay, so I don't know what the numbers would be today, but I'm sure it would be pretty large. So that's arcade games. Let's talk a little bit about digital electronic video games. So this kind of started in the 1950s to the present day. So again, these lessons will be skewed based off of my experience of the game industry. And we'll talk a little bit about example games and then base it off of game genres. And a game genre is basically putting our video games into categories based off of, it could be the mechanic, it could be the theme that the game is on, it could be even based off of the screen that it uses. We'll talk a little bit the client console platform, and also the idea of what a killer app is. Okay, so as time came on, when you bring out a console, you also need to have a video game that will help sell the console platform. Okay, and that's called the killer app. Okay, what's a game genre? Well, it's a type of specific category of game related by gameplay characteristics such as theme and game mechanics. A first-person shooter, for example. So the view that you're in is the first-person view, where you're actually kind of looking through a windshield, and the mechanic is shooting, right? So where you're firing a projectile every 5 seconds, for example. So that would be the first-person shooter game genre, or if you're playing a role-playing game where the major mechanic is character development. The console platform, so obviously Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch. We have our smartphone devices and so forth. These are the underlying hardware that we play our video games on. Okay, so the console being the hardware that you use in your family room, platform being the personal computer or your mobile device. Okay, and again, the killer app, the software that people have to have that ensure success of the platform it is on. Okay, people buy the hardware just to play the game or software. Okay, so we mentioned that the first video game came out in the 1950s, and that would be Tennis for Two by Higginbotham. And he showed this at the National Laboratories exhibition that happened in 1958. And he showed this on a oscilloscope. So an oscilloscope is this unit here that is used to show electrical impulses. So if you're creating a PC board or some sort of electrical device, this tells you if there's electrical signals going through, say, a wire. Okay, so that's what this is used for. You'll see waveforms. If it's a 1, it'll show a waveform that's up, or if there was no electricity, it would be 0. So 0s and 1s, you would see these waveforms. But he used this oscilloscope to demonstrate playing basically Pong, right, where you blip the light thing from one side to the other. And again, this is in 1958. Here's the instrumentation that he used. I think this is in the Electronics Museum here. The next important video game that came out was in 1962, but in MIT by Stephen Russell, and it's called Space War. So this is significant because you also have used the joystick for the first time and being able to shoot, two spaceships shooting at each other. What does this look like? Kind of like asteroids. And this came out again in 1962 on a PDP-1 computer. I'll show you the PDP-11 computer that I used to play a game called Rogue. Some of you folks heard of roguelikes. Well, it was created on a mini computer. Back then, they're called mini computers, but they were huge units that ended up being room-full sized computers, and that's what I played on. That and the VAX 11780, which was a digital computer made by Digital. All right, so Space Invaders, Atari 2600 was the first successful gaming home console. There was the Magnavox Odyssey that came out before this, but I wanted to show this one because this was the one that actually sort of started the console game revolution and sort of ended the arcade parlor. parlors because people could now play this at home. Okay, and the first killer app, Space Invaders. Uh, Me and my siblings played this for many, many hours back then, and you know the original game console came with 2 controllers, but probably used easily half a dozen of these up because I don't know if it's because they were cheaply made or because we were just too rough on them. But you know, 2 million units were sold in the first year, and again, this unit was you know, sort of started that home console revolution and so forth. So, and then it came in 1992, 1993 was a game called Doom. Okay, and this game sort of started the first-person shooter revolution. There was a couple of other first-person games that came out. Shoot, I forget the name of it. It was a tank game that uses vector art, but this is the first one that actually looked like you know, a 3D game. But in reality, it was really a 2.5D. And John Carmack, who was the incredible game designer / programmer that created this world, him and John Romero, who was the level designer at the time, built this world out and created this, but it wasn't even 3D. These were all bitmap images that mimicked 3D based off of depth using what they call the BSP tree, so binary space partition tree, which was used to use these bitmaps or sprites to make them, you know, foreshortened or smaller when you're further away and then larger when they're closer, so you can see this 3D looking wall here, and you can see this part of the floor looks larger because it's closer compared to the smaller sprites that were in the back. Okay, so using binary space partition trees to determine where you are in the world. Anyways, that was in 1992, 1993, and this was the first PC killer app that you know, was free. You know, they was using the free model. They didn't sell it or anything like that. And it came on 3.5-inch floppy disks, and I think it was 3 or 4 of them, if I remember correctly. There wasn't CDs or DVDs back then. And so then a system called Xbox came out, and around the killer app for this was a game called Halo. And some of you folks might have played Halo. And so it's basically a first-person shooter where, you know, you don't see your player character on your screen, but rather, you know, you see basically your hands and maybe the weapon, as well as have the heads-up display that showed, you know, items such as a mini map or you know, the weapon that you're using or even other things like you know, characters that are visible in your screen. And then Call of Duty came out on the PlayStation and as well as the Xbox. So this is the sort of where Halo was a specific to Xbox game. Call of Duty came out and worked both on PlayStation and the Xbox, so it was a multi-platform, multi-console, I should say, not multi-platform, but multi-console. This came out in 2003. And then I mentioned a game called Rogue, and those were shooters. And now we're talking about the game genre role-playing game. Okay, role-playing game is you play a character and you do character development on it. And this is sort of a game that depicted this, that your player going down into a dungeon. Okay, so this is sort of the first dungeon game where you run into items like bats and ghosts and ghouls, and you get to quaff potions and so forth, right? So you have strength and gold. You can find specific items like armor, so you can have uh, greater defensibility with armor. But was done all on text display. Okay, so the graphics here was these little dots. It's like characters, right? And not graphics as we know it today, where you can draw a line. You couldn't draw a line in a computer back then. Okay, you had to use these I think there were 8 by 8 pixels that depicted these dots and sort of double lines and things like that. And this could have been the first emoji right here for the player character here. Actually, I think that's a ghost. So here you turn on, if you see the lights, then the lights are on. If you don't see anything here, then the lights in that room are off. Okay. So again, this was in 1980 when this came out. And this is the computer that I played it on. This is the PDP-11 by Digital Equipment. And believe it or not, this reel-to-reel is what they stored the data on, okay? I believe this is the hard disk here. So I think the processing power on this was, not even a megabyte of memory, maybe a megabyte of memory. Now it's gigabytes worth of memory. So this is the actual machine. This is the reel-to-reel, like I mentioned. Here's another reel-to-reel that we used for backup systems of the system here. So I used this machine in college, as well as my first 2 or 3 jobs that I'd say projects that I worked on was using these machines. Okay, so an example of a role-playing game today. This was 2014. Lots of other role-playing games that you folks are playing. But here's, sort of one of the early MMO RPGs, which is massively multiplayer online role-playing game, right? You've got all, these RPG type games that are out there, but you can see the graphics has gotten way better than the graphics that were played in Rogue in the 1980s. So, and even the graphics today are even better than this 2014 example that I have here for a role-playing game. And again, role-playing game is the genre, right? So here's a fighting combat game. I bring up MechWarrior 2 because I mentioned that I was working at NVIDIA, and I got a chance to work on a demonstration version of MechWarrior 2 on the NVIDIA NV1. So this was our first version, the 3D version for enhanced graphics. We didn't do it using polygons and triangles like we know it, as a triangle for the primitive. We actually use quadratic texture mapping to render what you see here on the screen. So we overshot the world here, and this is MechWarrior 1 came out in 1989, and MechWarrior 2 came out in 1995. So this is again, multiplayer battle on your own local area network, where you have this game, which is online on servers located in some place in the world. This you can only play on a single server on your local area network back then. Final Fantasy in 2018 with Dissidia, as an example. You folks know all these other types of fighting games and combat games that are out there. Nowadays, there's Battle Royale, right, with Fortnite and PUBG, and I've been I bought Overwatch a year or two ago, maybe a couple years ago, and I've restarted playing Overwatch as a fighting game, and I'm enjoying playing it. Okay, so new game technologies, virtual reality and augmented reality are the 2 major gaming technologies today. So we're talking about electronic games, right? And associating it with the hardware and mapping it with the software that runs on this type of hardware. Virtual reality and augmented reality are the latest, with virtual reality being you're completely immersed in a 3D world, wearing these goggles, if you will, or headsets, and the whole system is of the game is and or the world is completely in this stereoscopic game where things look like, you know, the real thing, like in real life, where, you know, it's in stereo. Okay, so augmented reality came out with Pokemon Go a few years ago. I should have put the dates on this when it came out. Sorry about that. Basically, it depending on where you are in the world, it will put out different Pokemons in this world. So right here's a view of the park that you're in, and in it here you can capture this Doduo, or other types of Pokemon, you know, Pikachus and so forth, and Pidgeys. I used to play this a lot for about 6 months until they, you know, Niantic the folks there decided to make it harder to catch Pokemons, or at least rare Pokemons, at my house, and forcing me to have to go to gyms that are at businesses. So because they were trying to generate revenue by having customers go catch their Pokemons at these businesses. And actually, it was a mistake to change that thinking, because a lot of people, including myself, stopped playing the game. And where it was hugely popular when it first came out for the first 6 months, I want to say, and then they changed this, you know, using you know, good Pokemons at gyms, as opposed to at say, you know, my house or a nearby park, where, you know, there's no revenue being made at a nearby park, but rather, if, you know, they would sign up businesses to turn their businesses into gyms, and that's where you would have to battle to get better, or, you know, find better Pokemon. So again, here's sort of a list of history and killer apps with the hardware that it worked on. Hopefully I have my dates correct here. So starting with Pong in 1977, 1978 on the Atari 2600, through the first 3D-ish type game on a PC with Doom. And also, incidentally, it came out with the Intel 486 processor. Okay, later on, Pentium came out, and workstations with higher processing powers, with you know, through Sun Microsystems and Hewlett Packard, creating higher processing power that allowed, you know, better systems to come out. And again, this is before there were 3D graphics chips in the world. I mentioned McWarrior and so forth. There's something that I want to mention here is the importance of hardware that came out in around 2000, you know, 2005-ish, where a company called Nintendo didn't focus on CPU processing power and graphics chips. They actually tended to have an overall system and focused on the peripherals. Okay, so having a you know, a what they call the nunchuck remote with an accelerometer on it that determined how the motion of the controller determined how the game is going to be played. So if you're moving this nunchuck around, you're actually waving the sword on the screen. Okay, and that's using an accelerometer, and as well as a 6 degree of freedom, if you will, using XYZ positional stuff. The accelerometer actually came from from cars, where, you know, if you run into a car or into another object or using your car, it'll actually pull out and you know, trigger your what is it called, the airbag. Okay, so the accelerometers are on your bumpers, or I don't know where they're actually located, but once you bang into something, your airbag will open up. Okay, so VR is becoming more and more prevalent, and you know, so that's you know, where we are today, VR and augmented reality. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine, and her company actually created some really important augmented reality uh, type applications for things like um, first responders to train on things like CPR and medical response things that medical response functions, I should say. I shouldn't call them things. That people who you know, care for us in terms of emergencies. So that's an excellent use of augmented reality today. Okay, are these type of applications for medical training. All right, that's our lecture for this session. Hopefully, we'll be able to talk more about the history of ancient history and so forth. So that was electronics and our arcade. So good luck. We'll see you soon.